Hey guys, welcome to Herding Little Cows to the Glory of God. Today is sometime in November. That's as close as I have right now. I had a question on one of my comments. Someone was asking how I do childbirth and whether we do epidurals and that type of thing. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my births and how I have found best coping mechanisms. So first, if you haven't been here before, I am Sarah, married to Mark, and we have a bunch of kids. And I'll explain their birth stories as we go. But our oldest is 27 and he's actually my stepson. So I have nothing to know about his birth process and what happened there and feelings about that because I didn't know him at the time. My oldest just turned 20 and she is married and moved out of the house. And we have a grandbaby on the way, so that's very exciting. But she was my first birth. Of course, going into it, I felt like I had read all the stuff I needed to and understood all the stuff I needed to. And now, all these years later, I realized that I really had no clue. And I think that's how most moms are. You feel like you've done all the preparation and stuff during pregnancy, and then suddenly labor starts and you're like, I have no clue what's going on here. So she was my first. I had not a complicated pregnancy, but a hard pregnancy. I was very, very sick. Never had to go get IV fluids and stuff, but was throwing up multiple times a day and just trying to survive, I guess you would say. And I just felt so terrible and didn't know how to make that better. And also I started Braxton Hicks with her really early. So things were confusing to me about when labor actually was starting and stuff. I know people who have pregnancies where they don't have a contraction until they're actually in labor, and that would be amazing and would it make things a lot easier in my opinion from how things have gone. So with Virginia, I went into labor 4 days before her due date, and I knew it was labor because my water full on broke. I had just gone to the bathroom. I came back and sat on the couch, and we actually had a little boy who had, he used to let himself into our house. He was a neighbor kid. He'd let himself into our house and get himself food from our refrigerator. And he was over. And so something happened. He had come in, he walked over to the fridge. I went to stand up and my water broke. Mark didn't realize it, but I knew that that was not just urine. So it was funny because Mark was like, so I'm going to take him back home. He was little and we didn't think he should be wandering. So Mark was like, I'll take him back home. And I'm like, okay, are you coming right back? And he was like, yeah. Because we weren't we knew his parents, but we weren't super close friends. It wasn't like he was going to go down and hang out. But I didn't want to tell him before he walked down and have him freak out. So I waited till he walked back and told him that my water had broken. We went to the hospital and the doctor was like, oh, so this had been my maybe third or fourth visit because I had had so many contractions that they actually put me on limited activity, I think they called it. It wasn't quite bed rest, but limited activity at 31 weeks because I was having so many contractions and baby was so low. So I had been to the hospital a couple times, but when we went this time at 39 weeks, 3 days, I went in and said my water broke, and the doctor did the little paper strip test and said, no, it wasn't your water, you just wet yourself. And I was like, I am not leaving this hospital till I have this baby because I knew that was my water that broke. I knew for sure. So they did another test, which is where they put your amniotic, whatever the fluid is, on a disc. And then if it's amniotic fluid, not a disc, a slide for the microscope. And if it is amniotic fluid, it shows up as what looks like a fern, kind of. The liquid shows that. So they did that test and they were like, oh, look, it is your amniotic fluid. And I was like, I know. So we went to the hospital. I had not been sleeping great for a few nights before that because of all the contractions I had been having. And they told me that my labor was not progressing. I had had weeks of contractions. And when my water broke, my contractions stopped. So I really hadn't had much for contractions. So they said they checked me when I got to the hospital around 4. They said they'd check me again at 8. And if there was no progress, they'd give me a sleeping pill and I could sleep and we'd have baby tomorrow. We'd start Pitocin and stuff. And for me, that sounded wonderful because I was so tired from not sleeping the couple days before that I was like, oh, I'll get a full night's sleep. This will be great. Well, they checked me at 8 and I had gone half a centimeter. So they were like, okay, well, we're not going to give you the Pitocin. And give you the sleeping pill. And I was very sad. Looking back now, I think it's best to avoid Pitocin if possible and avoid interventions if possible. So I probably would have told them, no, let's not do the sleeping pill. But at the time, that's what sounded good to me. And I actually was upset because I was thinking I'm not going to get a full night's sleep and labor can go on forever and this is going to be so hard. So they checked me around 8. Around 9, my contractions really picked up. And I actually had a friend and her roommate, a friend from high school, and then her roommate from college was with her, who was actually a med student. They came to the hospital because I thought that I was just going to be sitting there doing nothing. And by the time they got to the hospital, I was having contractions. And so it was nice because Mark got a short break of rubbing my back because I had really bad back labor. He got a short break to go down the hall, but then I was getting ready to push, so he came back. But because this other friend rubbed my back instead, that's how he got the short break. So anyway, around 9, my contractions started. I just remember thinking I'm not going to be able to do this, and I asked for pain medication, which again, I wouldn't do, and I'll explain that as the video goes on. But they gave me something called Stadol, which I don't even think they use anymore. It made me go loopy, and I said that I'd name my baby after my friend's 2-headed dog that she made up. I didn't know what was going on around me. And I just remember thinking with each contraction, I need to rest between these because this is going to go on forever. So around 12:30 maybe, they said I was ready to push, which I was like, how can I be ready to push? Because I haven't really been in labor for 4 hours at this point. And I really was ready to push, but they gave me, they tried to tell me what to do. I'm on this Stadol. I don't really know what I'm doing, but pushing only lasted 20 minutes for me, and Virginia was born. They handed her to me all wrapped up, and I remember thinking, what am I supposed to do with this thing? I was still very out of it. I didn't, it was kind of an out-of-body experience. Didn't understand what was going on. So, and I felt loopy for the next 2 days. And I know part of that can be from having other babies. I know part of it can just be the lack of sleep and just all those hormones and all of that stuff. But I definitely did not feel okay. I'm the type of person who does not like to feel out of control at all. I don't drink alcohol because I don't like the taste of it. But the idea of taking something that's going to make me not be able to act the same way that I usually act is I don't understand that, why someone would want to feel that way. And after taking the Stadol, I really understand that. So I I decided I didn't want to take any pain medication after that. So fast forward a few years, this whole story needs to be stated we got pregnant with Virginia while we were on birth control, right after we got married. I was already on birth control because the doctors put me on it for painful periods. And that's something I won't do to my daughters because I think birth control messes up your system really bad. But I was already on it when we got pregnant. We continued on it, and Virginia was conceived on the pill. Everything was okay. I did have a little extra testing, but she was okay. There were no problems from that we know of. But then we decided after that we were going to continue to wait to have children because Mark was having neurological issues at the time, and we thought that we needed to tell God when our timing was. So we waited about 3 years and decided we were ready for another baby. And we almost immediately got pregnant. The night we decided we should have another baby, we got pregnant. But I had a miscarriage very early on in that pregnancy. And so we were like, okay, God, you told us that we weren't going to have children. We told you that we didn't want to have children. And you gave us Virginia, which is very much a blessing. And I see the error of my ways in that. And then we said, okay, God, we're ready to have children. And you took that one away. Kind of seems like you're in control of this. So we didn't do birth control after that point. But after the miscarriage, we got pregnant 3 months later, I think. And we had Naomi. Naomi was born. And I haven't written down all these details to give you right now. So I'm just off the top of my head telling you what happened. Naomi was born 8 days before her due date. I went into labor again with my water breaking in the middle of the night. I stayed home a little longer trying to rest than I had with Virginia. With Virginia, I immediately went to the hospital because I didn't know what was going on. So I stayed home a little bit longer, and then we headed on to the hospital. All of my births, Virginia and Naomi so far, most of my births that you'll hear about, I was attended by a midwife at a hospital. And so that was Virginia at a hospital about 2 hours from where we live now. But Naomi was at the hospital that we actually will be delivering this baby at. And I forgot to mention earlier in the video, I'm 13 weeks pregnant, 14 weeks pregnant at the timing of this video. So I hear the kids in the other room. So we went to the hospital, went through a couple hours of labor. None of my labors have been super, super long, but they definitely were. Virginia's was weird being so short right at the beginning. My labor with Naomi was not very long, and I only pushed a couple times before she was born. I did try with Naomi the birthing tub, and I absolutely hated it. Whatever nurse had told me that it would be a great idea and make my contractions better, didn't. I was ready to say not nice things to that nurse because I did not like it at all. But I am a person who's not huge on baths. I'm not huge on pools and stuff unless it's the actual like trying to cool down or trying to teach my kids to swim, but I'm not somebody who just likes to hang out in the water. Also, I have a problem called Charcot-Marie tooth, which is a form of muscular dystrophy, and I have trouble even on regular land balancing. And so in the tub, I felt even more like I couldn't like ground myself, like I couldn't get into a good position. So I did not like the tub. I am not saying the tub is not great for some people, because I have friends that think the tub is the most wonderful thing in the world, but it did not work for me. So just, I guess my point is, be willing to say this isn't working. Go into labor with lots of ideas that might help, but be willing to say this isn't gonna help me. Don't get stuck on I have to do a water birth or be in the water or whatever, and then feel like that's not working for you. It's okay to just give it up in the moment. Whatever's working for you in labor is good. So yeah, had Naomi, uncomplicated labor. I didn't take anything for pain or anything during that, and I felt really, really good afterward. With Virginia, I felt drugged. I guess you would say, for a while after, where I was drugged, but I felt like I couldn't get up to use the bathroom by myself. Like I couldn't function as a normal person because the drugs were still in my system. And again, I do not react well to drugs. A half a Percocet if needed for pain. You know, I had it one time because I had a really bad, I had my wisdom teeth out. A half a Percocet totally threw me loopy. And I know that's not for everybody, but for me, pain medication does not do well. So, but with Naomi, I just spent time breathing through it. It was a nice, slow progression of labor. So I was able to like get on top of things and like it slowly advanced to each level. So I felt like I was in control of that. And so I really enjoyed my experience with Naomi. I felt really good afterwards. I didn't have any complications and just felt like, okay, this is what birth should look like. This is great. Then we went on, our next son was Joshua. He was almost 2 years later when I delivered him. We were traveling actually at the time, and I had care. But at the time that I actually went into labor, I was just over 35 weeks. And we went to the hospital because my water broke, and the hospital said that it hadn't. Oh, back to Naomi's story. When I went to the hospital with her, again, my water broke, and they did the quick paper test and the litmus paper, I guess, and it did not show up that it was my water. So I don't know if my pH is off in my body or what, but my water very, very rarely shows up on the litmus paper. I've now had 10 births, and it's only shown up like 2 times, where it's nice and clear that they can say, yes, that was your water that broke. So with Naomi, they said it wasn't my water, but I was in active enough labor that they kept me. So with our son Joshua, we were out of state at the time that my water broke. So we went to the hospital, and they told me it was not my water that broke, even though I was having consistent contractions, but the nervousness of being at the hospital and them telling me that I was wrong and not knowing what, like them saying, you don't know what's going on with your body, and why are you traveling when you're this pregnant, and all the stuff that went with that, made me really, really anxious. and my body shut down. And that is something that happens to women. I don't think it's talked about enough by the medical community. But if you think about it, just how mammals labor, I'm not saying we're animals, but if you think about how mammals labor, if a bear goes into labor and there's a threat to mama bear, she can actually stop her labor so that she can get to a safe place to deliver her baby. And our bodies can do the same thing. If we feel threatened, if we feel like people aren't hearing us, if there's trauma going on around us, we actually can, our labors can stop. And there's not much we can do to restart them. There's things I would have done now had I known at the time, but this was my third birth. I thought it was going to be nice and uncomplicated like Naomi. And so they made me lay down when I got to the hospital, put monitors on me to hear baby. He was sounding great and everything, but made me lay down for an hour, which also doesn't help my labors. You probably wouldn't totally stop labor by laying down if it's actual labor, but putting that in of laying down and not moving around while you're also being yelled at and everything totally stopped my labor. So we went home that night. By the time we got home and had been yelled at and all of that, it was like middle of the night. And so I just didn't want to deal with anything anymore. And so I went to bed. Again, I probably would have tried to do things to get my labor going at that point, but we went to bed. My labor didn't restart. I think I was just too nervous about what was going on and everything. And we ended up delivering him 8 days later. My water bag resealed itself, which is something that can happen. So I was leaking fluid that night that we were at the hospital, but sometime probably the next day, the fluid stopped leaking. And 8 days later, my contractions started. They were fast and furious when they started, and we ended up delivering him maybe 4 hours later at home. I had just been praying to God, show me when is the right time to go to the hospital, and just felt this peace of being at home. We had actually read up on home birth before this because we had thought we were going to have a home birth with him. Like that was the plan. We would have a midwife at our house. So I had actually prepared myself for what a home birth looked like. And we had a friend that was coming to watch the children while we went to the hospital, was the plan. And he actually was, his wife had home birth. So he was not that we were using him as a midwife, but he had experience of this. So it was one of those that we were just kind of waiting, when do we go back? Because we don't want labor to stop again. God showed us that it wasn't the right time to go back, and baby was born at home. He was not breathing when he was born, and he was very, very blue. Also, my water, which had sealed back up, broke while I was pushing, and it was full of meconium. So we called 911 right away, and Mark started CPR, and we were never able to get him breathing or his heart beating again. The ambulance came, picked him up, and took him to the hospital. I had to wait for a second ambulance to come, and they, at the hospital, were never able to revive him either. So they worked on him for over an hour. I feel like it was God's timing, and there wasn't medical neglect at that point. But we found out later that, because we had to do an autopsy because it was an unattended birth. And I think it's funny when they say unattended birth, because there was myself and 2 guys there when the baby was born. It was attended. There were people, but they had to do the autopsy, and they found out that he had group B strep, which is an infection that a lot of women carry. I think it's 40% of women have it over the course of their lives at some point. But if baby gets it during the birth process, it can cause breathing complications that can lead to death. What the coroner explained to us is that when we went to the hospital and I said my water broke, they did a non-sterile exam and introduced the group B strep infection, which is actually in your vagina. And when they checked me, it pushed it up into the bag of waters. And so it was introduced into his living environment, and he got sick those 8 days before I actually delivered him. And so I really feel it was God having us be at home, because he had already passed, they believe, before he would have been born. And so at the hospital, they wouldn't have been able to do anything for him either. And I probably would have gotten a lot more interventions of a C-section or something like that, because his heart rate would not have been good or would have been gone by the time we got there. And that would have just introduced the infection even more into my body. I was very, very sick for weeks after that happened. And the doctors there at the hospital, this was out in California, not near us now, but they didn't treat me when I first went in for my water breaking. And then when I called them and said, the coroner said that I have group B strep, they said, we don't treat women for that. Even though I was very, very sick, like barely able to get out of bed, sick. We would go to church and I would manage to walk in the door and go lay down on the floor in the nursery. And that's the only thing I could do because I was so sick and worn out from that delivery. So anyway, we knew that that was something we had to watch going forward. But if you look it up, there's different things. If your water hasn't been broken too long and if baby's birth is quick and all of this, then it's less of a risk. But I had him without any pain medication. We were home. It was fast and furious. I felt like I was never able to like truly get on top of labor, but I was still able to manage through breathing and all of that stuff. And one funny thing about that was when I was in labor, Mark asked if it was time to call our friend who was coming to watch the kids, like, so we could head to the hospital. And I said, no, we don't have to call him yet. And like 2 contractions later, Mark's on the phone with him telling them they should come. And I was like, I didn't tell you that they should come. And he's like, but you moaned, and that means that we're going to have a baby soon. And Mark was right. So we had him, and they told us that by the time I got to my 6-week appointment, which was with a different practitioner, we had actually gone to a different state at this point, which was our travel plans originally. We went to a different state, and the midwife looked at me. I hadn't even explained the story. The midwife looked at me and she said, you're really sick, and told her the story. And she put me on medication right away. She actually wanted to hospitalize me, but knew kind of for my mental health, that was not going to be best to remove me from my family with all the trauma that had gone on. So, I did get better. It was a slow process. But they told me because of the untreated infection, I might never have children again. And 8 weeks later, I got pregnant with Samuel. And then they told me, why'd you get pregnant so soon? And I said, you told me I wasn't going to have kids and I wasn't going to prevent them anyway. But I didn't even know that I'd have the possibility of getting pregnant. So anyway, Samuel's pregnancy was great. I didn't mention that in the pregnancies with Naomi and Joshua, I was very sick at the start, throwing up multiple times a day with Naomi, really wanted to throw up all the time with Joshua, and again, had Braxton Hicks contractions really, really early on from like 25 weeks on. So again, it was hard to pinpoint exactly when labor was truly starting. I got checked a couple times with each of them to be like, is this actually labor? So then we went on to have Samuel. Samuel was an uncomplicated pregnancy. It was actually one of my favorite pregnancies because I had just prayed that God would let me enjoy every moment of it. And I knew the night that I conceived that I was pregnant. And I also prayed that I just wouldn't worry through the pregnancy. And Samuel was my most active baby, moving all the time. There was never a question of, oh, have I felt the baby move recently? Like, he was moving all the time. So we went on to have his delivery. His was nice and easy. Again, we had no complications with that. My first sign of labor was my water broke, and we went to the hospital. They couldn't see that it was my water, but I was luckily in active enough labor. They kept me. Again, with all of these, they say it wasn't my water that broke, but with most of them, I never actually had a moment where my water did break. Like, once we got to the hospital, they said, oh, that wasn't your water that broke, but I never had any time where my water would have broken later on. So it was my water that broke. There are, just for people watching who don't know, there actually are 2 bags of water. And so you can have just the first, the 4 waters, I think they're called, break, which is just a small amount of water that can come out, and the other bag of water is still intact. But when your water breaks, there's a gush, there's a trickle, you feel it, there's something that goes on. I can see maybe like if you were in a birth tub, you wouldn't feel it necessarily. I think you would still feel it, but I could understand not. But when your water breaks, there's water and there's stuff, and you know it. happen. So, yeah, Samuel's labor was super uncomplicated. It was pretty fast. It was only a couple pushes. Joshua's was only a couple pushes also. My body has the pushing part down. My body has the labor part down really well. It's the pregnancy part that's a little hard for me. So we had Samuel, and even though it had been less than a year since I had delivered Joshua, I didn't have any complications. Oh, go back. Okay, maybe a little much TMI, but I'm going to tell you. When I had Joshua, I immediately tried to jump back into just doing life again because I wanted the kids to have some sense of normalcy after the losing the brother and everything that had gone on. So I pushed myself. My mom came to California to be with us right after the birth, and it was almost Naomi's birthday. She turned 2 days later, and so we took the kids to the beach and stuff, and I overdid it. And so I had a prolapse, whether it was a uterine prolapse or a bladder prolapse. I know there's different things that can prolapse through childbirth. I don't know what it was, but there was definitely a prolapse. But the doctors weren't seeing me, as I explained in the other thing, the malpractice stuff. So there was some type of prolapse. I was trying to do exercises that I had found online to help that prolapse, and it never became more of a problem. And even when I delivered Samuel, there was no problem that existed from that prolapse before. I know that's not everyone's experience, but I'm just explaining, if you have had a prolapse in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a problem in the future. Mine was left untreated. Like, I was trying to treat it at home, but I didn't see medical professionals about it. I didn't do physical therapy about it, and it had resolved itself. So we had Samuel. A few years later, skip back real quick. Between Virginia and Naomi, we had the miscarriage. It was a very early miscarriage. I had a lot of cramping. It felt like labor pains, but I was probably about 6 weeks, and I didn't lose a huge amount of blood. I never went to the hospital for it. Like, I had talked to my midwives. They knew what was going on, but there was nothing that had to happen there. It was very early on, and it took my body a while to heal. I still bled for a while, but there was no emergency or anything around that. Okay, skip forward. We're now to Josiah. Josiah was another pregnancy where I was sick at the start with all my boys. I want to throw up all the time, but I don't throw up much. All my Braxton Hicks start somewhere between 20 and 25 weeks with all of the kids. So we go and have Josiah. Josiah's birth was a little complicated. At this point, all the kids are getting a little bit earlier when I deliver them. Josiah was delivered at 23 days early. And again, my water broke. I stayed home for a while trying to get labor going, but just felt like nothing was pushing me into active labor. And because of the group B strep that I had, they want me to take antibiotics, like IV antibiotics during labor to help the risk of the baby having the group B strep. If you've had group B strep before, you might test negative in another pregnancy. But if you have a baby who's been affected by group B strep, there's more likelihood that another baby will be affected. Because of the scenario behind mine, it might not be a problem because I'm not planning on letting the medical community throw me out of the hospital again when my water's broken. But we just do it as a precautionary measure because I would rather have more medical intervention than the baby having medical intervention if possible. So we went to the hospital because my water had broken, but contractions weren't starting. And up until this point, because of all the water breaking, but not fully being in labor, I'd had Pitocin for most of them, even just a small dose, but I'd had Pitocin to get things going. Well, with Josiah, my water broke, but my body wasn't truly ready to be in labor yet. So we did Pitocin, but it wasn't really helping very much. So my labor with him ended up being almost 2 full days because they got me up to like the max dose of Pitocin and my body wasn't kicking into labor. So they lowered it down so I could get a couple hours of sleep and they started it again. And it was just a very long labor. But the whole labor, the baby looked great. on the monitors. I even dislocated my knee in the middle of labor with him and fell on the floor. And as soon as they got me up, they put the monitors back on and he sounded great. So everything looked great in that whole pregnancy. And when he was born, again, just a couple pushes and things went really smoothly. He was healthy. He was early. So like he was that late preemie, they call it. And so, yeah, 36 weeks, 5 days. He was very tired. So I would try to wake him up to nurse and he didn't really want to nurse, which is very normal for late preemies. I didn't really think much of it. And so the nurses at the hospital helped me to express colostrum and give it to him on a spoon. If you don't want to introduce a bottle to do nipple confusion, you can give it either through like a little medicine cup or a spoon or a syringe. You can give them colostrum. And the nurses just felt that with my experience of being a mom and everything, they didn't want me stuck in the hospital just because the baby didn't want to wake up to eat. They felt that I could take care of him at home. They just didn't want him to lose a certain amount of body weight, because all babies are going to lose some body weight from whatever they're born at till the time they head home, because they've been sitting in fluid for 9 months and they're losing some of that water fluid and all of that meconium that's been sitting in them. When they take that first measurement, baby hasn't peed yet. Usually baby hasn't peed yet, baby hasn't pooped yet. When you start making colostrum, you're making just a tiny, tiny bit. So they're not getting much for calories. So all of that has the baby lose some weight. And most hospitals say baby can lose up to 10%, but if it's more than that, they keep you to make sure baby is going to be able to thrive. The nurses just don't want me stuck there. So we were able to give him some milk, but a few days after we got home, I mean, he was still nursing in that process. We were just getting him more calories with the spoon. And within a few days of getting home, we weren't even having to do that anymore. He was just nursing along. And he actually was my child who had the most well child visits, because where he was born small, he's always been on the small side, but he was my first small baby. All my other babies were chunks. I nursed them. I guess I make good breast milk. They just chunk right up. Samuel at 10 months was 28 pounds. Josiah was growing on his own little curve. And so he was staying on the curve of weight he was supposed to, according to the charts. But for me, he was really, really skinny for my babies. And I just wanted to make sure he was growing right. So we took him to the hospital, to the regular well child visits more often than I did the others. The others, I wasn't necessarily skipping appointments on purpose, but it was more like if it didn't work out, we'd just wait till the next one. Quick, not going to get into all of it, but because of issues with Virginia with some vaccinations, as a family, we don't do vaccinations. So I don't need to hit all the well child visits to get the vaccinations in. So Josiah, we found out when he was 10 months old that he had cerebral palsy, and we have the own videos on that, but that was not something that was found in well child visits. And it should have caused problems with his nursing, and he also had a tongue tie, which should have caused problems with his nursing, but neither of those did. He was a fine baby, and they don't know when. They feel he had a stroke in utero, whether that was sometime late in pregnancy. They determined it was sometime after 28 weeks up until delivery. Was it because of my long labor with Pitocin? I don't know, but sometime in that point, his brain had a lot of damage. Again, a whole other video series. So after Josiah, approximately 2 years later, we got pregnant and we had another miscarriage. That one was a little later on, I think about 8 weeks. I don't think I had an appointment yet. My first appointment for both the first miscarriage and this one I'm talking about. I went for an appointment to date baby, like your first appointment to date baby, and baby did not have a beating heart. So I had already lost baby by that point, but I don't remember how far along I thought I was at that point. So both of those, we waited out for baby, for the miscarriage to happen at home. With my second miscarriage, I bled a lot, and it was a little touch and go of, do we go to the hospital? We ended up not going to the hospital, but we had a bag ready if we decided to go. And right about the time we were about to go, my bleeding slowed down a lot. But again, I didn't do anything with taking any pills or going to the hospital for DNC or anything. That pregnancy the miscarriage did resolve itself. Everything that had to happen happened. I've never had to go for like a miscarriage to get retained placenta or anything. But that was a really scary one because we didn't know if we would have to go to the hospital. So a few months after that, maybe 3 months after that, I got pregnant with Abigail. With my girls, up to this point, I'm throwing up multiple times a day, having trouble keeping anything down, but not having to go to the hospital because I'm able to keep down enough that I'm still gaining slowly. Again, Braxton Hicks started early. Abigail's birth, again, my water broke. I went to the hospital. At this point, they told me that my water hadn't been breaking, and so all of the Pitocin they had handed me in the other births was not necessary because my water really hadn't broken. But I know as a mama and everything I've read about and all of that, that it really was my water. And so with Abigail, though, my water didn't break in the same way. Like I could tell that I was leaking a little fluid, but it wasn't the amount that I had with the others. And so it was just that first bag, the 4 waters, that broke. So I did have some leakage, but it wasn't the full thing. And so went to the hospital, had her. That was all quick. My labors for the last couple that I've mentioned to you, it takes me a long time to get to active labor. But once I got into active labor, I had baby within an hour. So with Abigail, we had sent the kids off with grandma, said, go get some dinner. She was going to take them out to dinner. And I said, we'll call you when the baby's born. And they had gone, like they had been with us. They left to go to the restaurant. They had only gotten their drinks. Like they had just ordered their food, only gotten their drinks when we called and said, baby's here. So again, fast and furious. I don't know. I kind of prefer the slower labors because I feel like I can get on top of them better. But it was fast and furious. Baby comes, again, no pain meds, just breathing through it, really taking my time to concentrate through the contractions. Remember that God has made my body for this, allowing my body to open up. So like keeping a really loose jaw, trying to not clench your hands, just trying to breathe through the contractions. But Abigail's labor was great recovery. All these ones that I've mentioned so far, the miscarriage was hard, but the others, all a great recovery. I feel wonderful afterwards. Fast forward 2 years, we get pregnant with Uriah. Uriah's pregnancy is different for me. I end up having some bleeding at the start. It was maybe implantation bleeding. We never really figured it out, but it made me nervous because I had a positive test, but I was bleeding and I never had that before. They took my HCG and it had more than doubled at the 72 hours. So it was okay. But then my pregnancy was really weird and I was barely sick, like felt nauseous a little bit once in a while, but definitely not as sick as I had been with the others. And not with him, there was not as much Braxton Hicks contractions leading up to it. So great pregnancy, great labor. It went really quick. We actually had the kids in the room at 8:30 that morning. They had come to visit because my mom had called. We had gone in because my water broke again. My mom called and said, do you want the kids to come see you this morning? And at that point I was like, sure, nothing happening. It takes them 15 minutes to get to the hospital. By the time they got to the hospital, I'm like having to breathe through the contractions, definitely painful. So they stayed around for maybe 10 minutes. I sent them with my mom. She works at the hospital, so they went on a walk down the hall. And about a half hour later, I called them and said baby was there. So his was very easy. And again, no complications, nothing like that. Go back to Josiah's birth. I just finished Uriah's. I'm getting there. Mark came in, had to tell him. Go back to Josiah's birth. With Josiah's birth, I did lose quite a bit of blood. We're not exactly sure why that happened, but I also wasn't able to nurse him very well, which nursing can help clamp down your uterus afterwards. And I had not been doing much for moving around and help my body get going in labor. So I had had a lot of Pitocin, and that can also cause you to hemorrhage. So I lost a lot of blood. I was kind of on the verge that they were like, a blood transfusion would really help you, but we're not forcing you to have one because you're kind of on the edge. and I decided with him not to have a blood transfusion. We've never had to make that determination, so I don't want to get into here. I know some people don't do it and some people do. We've never had to make the decision. I decided not to do it because I had dislocated my knee during the labor, and I knew that I wasn't going to be doing a lot once I got home because I physically couldn't move around. Had it been another baby, you know, you get home and you tend to start doing things. But I knew that I was going to be stuck on the couch because I could not walk without holding on to something. I could not stand for any length of time because my knee would swell up huge. So I knew I was going to be resting. So I did not do the blood transfusion. That labor definitely took longer to recover from, but it wasn't terrible. I was just very tired. But there was also I'm not doing anything and I'm sitting here without being able to move. So that probably added to that too. Okay, so we had Uriah. Things were good. We went on 2 years later. All my babies are about 2 years, a little more than 2 years. 2 years later, I go on and have Malachi. Malachi was, again, I had some bleeding right at the start of pregnancy, and it was like, okay, what's going on? This isn't my normal. But they did my HCGs, and my HCGs were okay. I, again, did not have a lot of nausea or vomiting during it, maybe just a handful of times feeling nauseous. So that was very, very different for me. And I mean, it had been like Uriah, but for me, with the others, I always knew when we went in for the one to find out the gender, the ultrasound to find out the gender, I knew which baby it was because I was so sick with the girls throwing up all the time. And with the boys, I just wanted to throw up. I knew what the baby was. With Uriah and Malachi, I had no idea what the gender was when we went in because they were so different for me. So again, good pregnancy with Malachi. I did have, no, actually I didn't have a whole lot of Braxton Hicks contractions. I mean, I did have Braxton Hicks contractions, but not as much as my previous ones. When I went into labor with Malachi, things went really easy. It went really fast. Well, actually, it didn't go as fast as the ones before. I was in the hospital for a while in early labor. Like, it took a long time to get to that next step. And then I kind of got stuck at 7. But again, we're talking hours, not my 1 hour, but this isn't like days. So my labor with Malachi stalled a little bit. And that was the first time I had actually thought about pain medication, because with my others, I went from 4 to 10, within a half an hour, I'm like, done. Well, I was feeling a lot of back labor with Malachi, and I had them check me because I was feeling pushy, and they said I was only 7. And so I was trying to, in my head, get over I'm not going super fast. And my mind was just stuck that I'm at 7, I can't do this. And so I don't know, maybe an hour later, I don't know, time goes out the window when you're in labor. But I said, could you check me again if I'm still at 7? Can I try? Our hospital had recently got the air and gas, I think it's called, like the laughing gas stuff. And my midwife was like, I don't think I need to check you. I think you're going to have the baby soon. And I actually did have the baby soon. So it was just a mental block of I'm stuck at 7. But his recovery went great and all of that. 2 years later, we go to have Gideon. Gideon, my labor was a little more normal. I didn't have bleeding, I think. I don't think I had bleeding with Gideon. All the stories run together. I wasn't super sick with him. I didn't know it was a boy. And pregnancy was great. Labor was good. With Gideon, however, I really believe I was in labor like a week before I had him. I had one night where I was having contractions every 5 minutes. But I feel like he was in a bad position, and it ended up that he was born what they call sunny side up. Babies are supposed to be facing the ground. Like, if mom's laying on her back and baby's born with their nose facing the ground. Gideon was born with his nose facing up, and it puts different pressure on your spine when you're in labor. And so I was having really bad back labor with Gideon, and I needed a lot of help from Mark with counter pressure He did a lot of squeezing my hips. The nurse was helping us get into positions for that, and definitely was different experience. More like Virginia's, but I was too drugged to know exactly what was going on with Virginia. But I really feel like I should have done more exercises during pregnancy to try to get him in the right position. So this pregnancy, I'll be doing more. But when we were in labor, I was kind of worried that I was going to get stuck like I had the last time, but that didn't happen. I did have her check me, and I was, I don't know, 7 or 8 centimeters. And I was definitely feeling everything because of the back labor and stuff. And I remember her asking, do I have time to go to the bathroom? And I said, yes. And so her and Mark both ran to the bathroom, and she ran back and barely got a glove on for baby to slip out. So Gideon was definitely, I felt like it was going to take a little bit to get from that 8 or whatever she told me I was at. And suddenly she was suddenly I was like, baby's coming. It was nothing I was doing. They call it the fetal ejection reflex, that your body just takes over. So I wasn't pushing because they weren't there, and I kind of had this nervous, but I'm not fully dilated yet, and my body just pushed him out. So that went really easy. So now after him, I had a miscarriage earlier this spring. It was not, it was hard because of the timing of when it was and the things we were trying to get done. It happened, Virginia got married this spring, and it happened kind of over the weekend that she got married. And then while we were trying to move from Tennessee back to Maine. So I had to like pack and do things like that. And that was very challenging in the circumstance of where we were at the time. But the miscarriage itself was not scary like the one that before, where we had thought we had to go to the hospital. I never felt like, okay, this is hospital time. And so then that miscarriage, I had not had an appointment or anything. I was still too early. We were going to have an appointment as soon as we got back to Maine the next week. So I was probably about 6 weeks. So this pregnancy, I got pregnant. I felt good. I never had any bleeding or cramping or any of those things. And I so far am about 14 weeks, and I'm feeling nauseous all the time, but I haven't thrown up yet. So we'll see. Maybe it's a girl, maybe it's a boy. I don't know. But tips for labor. Try to stay on top of the contractions. Try to take your rests in between them, but just be attentive when the contractions happen to rest your body as much as possible. If that means you need to have people leave the room because they're annoying you, nurses are great at kicking them out. Just so you know, I've had to kick people out in labor before. Take the time to prepare yourself beforehand with positions or things during labor that might help you. Maybe water would help, like maybe a shower, maybe the bathtub, maybe, breathing techniques, if that's good for you, different positions you'd be able to get in. Get yourself aware of those and get your partner aware of those, because if your husband can help remind you, you should be moving around. Not that you have to be like walking the room, but just changing positions regularly. It helps baby get to the place that they're supposed to be. Also, having your husband remind you in labor to use the bathroom. This has not been one for me. I've always had to be on fluid because of the IV drip for the Group B strep. I've always had to be on fluid, but some women, their bodies don't feel the sense to need to pee. And if your bladder is full, baby can't descend as easily. So get someone to remind you to be drinking, but also to be going to the bathroom. Eating if you feel like eating. I ate with Virginia because they told me I should because they didn't really think I was in labor, and I threw up. I had no want to eat. They told me I should, so I did, and I threw up. Almost every other birth, I have wanted to eat during labor. Not just I know it's good for my body, but like I've actually felt hungry, and none of those have I thrown up. But I did have one labor, I forget who it was, but I wasn't hungry, and so I nibbled to get some sugars in me, maybe like a spoonful of honey or like a clementine, but don't eat like a meal if you're not actually hungry. Just make sure you're keeping up on the fluids. Making sure that you're asking your nurse for support, whether you're or your midwife if you happen to be at home, but asking them like, okay, this doesn't feel right, what's something else I can do? They can help you with positions and things like that. But again, I haven't done, other than my first where I took the Stadol, I have not done any pain medication for any of them. And pain medication makes your body not able to communicate with baby in the same way that you communicate with baby when you're not on the drugs. And so baby's able to actually handle labor easier when your body and baby's body are communicating. So if you can avoid medication, it is best for you and baby. But I do know that there are times that is the choice that needs to be made. So, but just know, childbirth is not, I love childbirth, even though I have pain during childbirth. And in the middle of it, it's like, okay, when is this going to be over? I am actually very excited about birth that's going to happen here in 26 weeks. So I look forward to it. I think it's amazing. And I have a video on how I feel that brings you closer to God. So birth is not something to be feared. Your body is made to have a baby, and allowing yourself to feel comfortable during the labor is the most important thing. Because like I said, your body can shut down from labor if you're not feeling comfortable, but also it brings stress to mom and baby, which can be heart problem, blood pressure, that type of thing, when mom isn't feeling comfortable in the place she is. So between you and your husband, making the decision of what is best for where you're going to birth the baby, how you're going to birth the baby, your birth plan for the hospital, all of that, doing it according to what mom is going to feel supported and loved and cared for during that labor. So there's the long version of our births. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. We'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining us on Herding Little Cows to the Glory of God.